Welcome to Concept Being the podcast, where the intention is well, but let's be for real. Life gets a little chaotic, and so do we. And that's totally fine. It's fine. You're fine. I'm fine. We're literally fine. And we're all about finding the balance while staying honest with health, wellness, and all the juicy topics that matter. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Concept Being the podcast, where the intention is well. My name is Jade, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And today's episode is all about the concept of identity healing, and it is so good. It's so good, y'all. I'm so excited for this chat because I'm joined by the lovely, the iconic, the coolest Dr. Grace Reego. And we met in Bali on my birthday. So it was like written in the stars for us to meet. She was literally sitting right next to me on my birthday as I was getting my birthday dinner. We talked in the bathroom. I was like, "Oh my God, girl, I love your purse." And she was like, "Thanks." And then we realized that we're both from California. And then we went out to go get dinner a different night, went to ecstatic dance. Okay. We got down on that dance floor. And then we went to Uluwatu. Okay. We were in the club, partied in Uluwatu together, and then just had so many amazing conversations. We were like, we should do a podcast together. She was like, bet. So here we are doing a podcast together, and it is so good because Dr. Grace is a board certified doctor of acupuncture, as well as a spiritual coach and a German new medicine practitioner in training. Okay, she's iconic. I told you guys. She blends ancient healing with modern insights in her business called In Spirit Alchemy. And today we are chatting all about how your body might be expressing unresolved emotional shocks, how somatic inquiry helps you rewrite deep identity patterns, as well as why your symptoms might actually be your body trying to tell you that it's healing. So this one is for the girls that are tired of chasing their symptoms and ready to actually get to the root. It's also for my hypochondriac ass because Grace really explains what's actually going on in the body, and maybe I'm not dying. So get ready. Here we go. All right, let's jump in. Dr. Grace, do you want to kick us off with a moment?
Yes, let's see. So the gratitude moment is the one I'd like to go with. I'm very grateful that I just had a family reunion in Canada and I just got back, and we only do this reunion with my dad's side like once every 8 or 9 years, and I feel like I got to connect with my cousins as adults on like a deep spiritual level for the first time in our lives, and it was just beautiful. I was out in the wilderness in a national park in Canada, and I just feel so grateful to have the family that I have. Yeah. So I'm feeling
Yes.
kind of fulfilled on the family front. It's really nice.
I love that. I feel like my grateful moment is very similar to yours, but I
Okay.
love that you were able to reconnect with your cousins like as grown-ups because I know
Yeah.
like as little kids you're different and now we're all grown up. So I love that for you. Mine is also a grateful moment for family. Dr. Grace, my mom just had surgery and everything went well. So I just was feeling all the emotions. I was like, God, I'm just so grateful that my parents are healthy.
Yes.
It's something that I think I take for granted. And the moment that you kind of have like oh my God, is everything going to be okay with my mom or my dad? It was shocking to my system. And so I'm very grateful that the surgery went okay. And I'm grateful that my parents just are healthy human beings. So that is my
Yeah.
grateful moment.
Yeah. I do think about that a lot, as your parents go into retirement and age a little bit. It's like you really can't take for granted to have two healthy parents. And that's something I thought a lot about too. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sends me into a spiral if I think too deeply about it. Like, oh my God, my parents are not invincible and they did not
Yeah.
drink from the fountain of youth. Like, they also age. I don't know. In my head, I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's everyone else's, but not mine. And then
Yeah.
I was just like, oh no, this is real. So, yeah, super
Yeah.
grateful. But
One of the spiritual teachers I love to listen to, he says he made this post that really touched me not too long ago, and he said, we all think that everybody else is going to die except ourselves.
mhm.
And also like the people closest to us, like our parents, right? But it really hit home. Like we all assume that for whatever reason, like we don't end, but we get that death is real and it just happens to everyone, but we don't really wake up and go, what am I going to do with my life if I know, I'm going to die one day? Like, and that's actually can be a very spiritual practice to confront that and sit with it and say, this is going to end. And what do I want to make with the time that I don't know how much I have, but what do I want to do right now? And it can actually kind of put things in perspective very quickly.
Yes, and honestly, we'll get into it later, but I think that I feel like this conversation is very fitting for the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay. So, we're super grateful for our family, but I'm also super grateful that you're here to talk to me about German new medicine and somatic inquiry. So,
Yeah.
first of all, Dr. Grace, what is German new medicine? Explain it to me like I actually don't know what it is. So, explain it
Yeah.
to me like just
Totally.
basics.
Yeah. Okay. So, German New Medicine is a biological map of exactly how the psyche, brain, and organs in your body have an intimate connection where, how do I want to say this? All of our biological symptoms, especially chronic symptoms, so anything that falls outside of the three exceptions of injury, malnutrition, and poisoning, everything else we experience, every symptom and ailment and dis-ease and skin rash and irritable bowel syndrome and migraines and insomnia, all falls into the 5 biological laws of German New Medicine, which link a conflict shock experience in the psyche with changes in the brain that can be picked up and verified on a CT brain scan, and then corresponding changes and adaptations in the organ controlled by that part of the brain. And the type of conflict you experience is all determined on your unique psyche and how you perceived the situations of your life. And the conflict shock, the shocking traumatic experiences we go through, this scientific map, this biological model shows us how quite literally those events, even though they start in the psyche, are what cause biological symptoms and physical disease and biological adaptations. And actually, in German New Medicine, we don't really like the word disease because the body's doing something really intelligent every time. And we would call it a biological program or adaptation, but in Western medicine, we think of it as diseases, but all disease is really the body adapting to a shocking traumatic event that the psyche perceived as threatening. And then the nature of the conflict and the way the psyche perceived it influences which part of the brain is going to be impacted with the Hammer focus or the rings that can be picked up on a CT head scan. And the nature of the conflict will also determine which organ systems and which part of the body is going to express symptoms in the healing phase. So I know that's a lot, but essentially at the highest level, or maybe at the lowest level even, German New Medicine shows how the symptoms you experience are not random and they're not wrong. There's nothing wrong with you, and you aren't faulty, and your body isn't making some big glitchy mistake. There is a perfected reason that connects back to the brain and the psyche.
Okay, that makes sense. Couple of follow-up questions just to make sure I'm understanding things. The
Yeah,
psyche is the brain?
that's actually a really great question. And I love that you asked that because I've been thinking about this week. I'm not so sure that our consciousness is tied to, consciousness being the psyche. I'm not convinced our consciousness is absolutely attached to the brain. When we all think of the mind, I feel like all of us, especially in the West, we kind of think about this part of the body, right? We're like, oh, the mind, it must be the brain, the energetic, aspect of the brain. But I'm not so sure because there's a lot of interesting metaphysical research that shows that our organs also have their own consciousness. And you can even see this in the kind of research where someone gets a heart transplant or a kidney transplant, and all of a sudden they have a completely different personality because they're almost picking up the energetic signature of the person whose organ was transplanted into them. And so there's actually a lot of cases of, let's say, a wife coming back to the hospital and saying, my husband is not the same since his heart transplant. Like he has different interests. He's a completely different person. He has a different sense of humor. So there's so many accounts where it begs the question, perhaps actually our consciousness is not just tied to the brain or the head area. It could be something that permeates every cell or every organ, or maybe in Chinese medicine, each organ has a bit of a different unique consciousness too. So it's actually quite multi-layered, but in Chinese medicine, we do speak of all the different organ systems as like their own unique elemental system. And so from my lens as also a Chinese medicine doctor, it begs the question, yeah, like what really is our consciousness and what really is the psyche? And I don't know if we have a definitive answer, but I'm not convinced it's absolutely something merged with the brain. I think it permeates a larger part of us and almost like a quantum spiritual aspect of us that's yet to be fully discovered.
Honestly, I know you said like we don't really understand it, but somehow I feel like I understand what you're talking about. Like I don't know how to
Okay,
put it
good.
in words, but like I feel like I get what you're saying. Like it's not
Good.
just up here, it's like almost like the essence of a person or something like that. That's
Yeah.
like where I think you're going with it. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the other thing that I wanted maybe more clarification on is what is conflict shock? Is that like a traumatizing event for a person?
Yeah. So glad you asked. These are great questions. So the actual term in German New Medicine for a conflict shock, the it's DHS, and that's an acronym for Dirk Hammer syndrome. So Dr. Hammer was the German man who pieced together this intricate biological mapping of psyche, brain, organ, the two phases of every adaptation, and the five biological laws. So he's basically the father of German New Medicine, and his son was named Dirk Hammer, and he lost his son tragically, which actually led him to discover how that shocking tragedy led to his own testicular cancer. And that's what launched him into the rest of his life exploring the connections here. So the Dirk Hammer syndrome, DHS, that was his term for a moment of shock where that moment, I want to preface, does not necessarily have to be some major trauma. It actually can be something very subtle, and you may have no idea that that event is still running the show behind the scenes, or what you perceived from that event is causing the adaptations in your biology and symptoms. So, a conflict shock is when these three criteria are met. It's when you're caught off guard and it's, highly unexpected, you're overwhelmed or it's highly acute, and you're isolated. And the isolation is actually the most critical aspect of a conflict shock, because the fastest way to take someone out of conflict is to have them be seen and heard and recognized and feel like they're not totally alone in their experience, which is why things like therapy and coaching and retreats and somatic healing and breath work and any kind of environment where you can share the trauma you've been through with others is so healing and takes us out of our inner conflict so quickly, because isolation is actually the most daunting aspect for any one person when they go through something very conflicting like that. But yeah, the three criteria for a DHS or conflict shock, in short, is when something is catching you off guard and you're overwhelmed and you're isolated, psychologically or physically isolated in the experience.
Okay. I'm not smiling, it's not funny, but like, I feel like I tend to isolate. So, like, people that tend to isolate during like traumatic events and stuff like that, that's probably not the best thing to do.
Everyone has their process, so I don't want to judge, yes or no. If someone were to go through something really traumatic, but they felt safe to instantly open up about it to a professional or to a loved one, that could prevent them from going into the full biological program that would ensue from the conflict shock. If they stayed isolated and felt like this is now a piece of their identity that they need to hide, that can be where you're holding on. That's the whole idea of the body keeps the score. What you hold on to in the psyche, the body also holds on to as well. Basically, if there's nothing else that a listener takes from my explanation of German New Medicine, which I may not be doing a good job because it's a really complex science, if there's nothing else a listener takes, I just want them to take the idea that you can never separate your brain and your organs from the psyche itself. There is you cannot extricate, you can't piece and say, we're going to talk about the mind, and now we're going to talk about the body, and now we're going to talk about the brain. It's like, you cannot, the body, mind, spirit thing that we all hear about, it's actually one thing that pulling it apart into three separate pieces actually is not helpful medically, because they're absolutely merged and fused, and that's what Dr. Hammer discovered.
I think that this kind of leads us into, well, slowly leads us into the next part, which is somatic inquiry. So how does
Yeah.
using, first of all, backtrack.
Yeah.
What is somatic inquiry and how does that fit into German New Medicine?
Yeah. Great question. So somatic inquiry, that's my shortened term for it. My mentor's proprietary term for it is integrated somatic inquiry, or ISI, but we can just call it SI, somatic inquiry for short. Somatic inquiry is the, so let me back up. German New Medicine, I believe, maybe should not be called medicine, because that gives the notion that it's actually a therapy or a modality of healing. I like to think a bit of it as like the German New Medicine map. A GNM is really a map. It's a mapping of how the type of conflict shocks you have link to the types of brain tissue changes, which links to the type of organ tissue changes. It's really just a map that you can look at and go, okay, I can trace back how this started, and I have agency as the commander of my own psyche to dissolve and work with the origins of this and no longer live in, you know, the in between of always being in and out of conflict because I keep getting re-triggered through life. So I guess that would be how German New Medicine is helping me see where I need to start with a client, I guess. So it's like, okay, German New Medicine gives me the roadmap, and then I come in with the inquiry and with my coaching experience and my intuitive experience working with clients to find what identity was created in the moment of shock. Because that shock is not going to continue to linger in the mind and body if there's not some aspect of your identity that got roped into it. So, for example, let's say I got screamed at by, you know, a coach, you know, and it was very isolating, and I was embarrassed in front of my teammates. And let's say I'm a young kid or teenager, and I'm being screamed at by this angry coach. And if I just was screamed at by a coach, like reality without a story is this, you know, coach is making loud mouth noises at a young person. That would be reality without a story. And if we could actually live in reality without story, there'd be very little to be in conflict around, because we, you know, there's only meaning when our psyche assigns meaning to something. But it's in the psyche of that athlete, let's say, being screamed at. It's, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I fucked up, I no longer belong on this team. So it's some identity like I'm bad, I never do anything right, I don't belong, nobody likes me, I'm not good enough. Maybe it's about his performance. So maybe his psyche says, oh, I'm not good enough to play for this coach. Like, everyone's psyche is as unique as a snowflake or a thumbprint. So how we interpret those events of reality are going to be different for each of us. But if that athlete in this analogy could not assign any part of their own inner self identity to the experience, then conflict would resolve, the cycle would complete very quickly, and they would be out of conflict. They might have a really short healing phase, and they would just move on. But where people get chronic illness and chronic symptoms that go back and forth from the conflict active phase, that's the first phase of the two-phase model, to the healing phase where the symptoms emerge, going back and forth over and over all through life, is called a hanging healing. And the hanging healing is kept alive because your identity is attached to it, and that's what's actually triggering. We're never triggered unless our own identity is involved. There's nothing that could possibly trigger me unless there's something I'm thinking and believing about myself. Without that, I cannot be triggered. So when we're triggered, and that the trigger itself reminds us of the original conflict shock and the kind of worthiness or identity that we attach to it, that's why we go through life and we feel like no matter what we do, we just keep ending up in the same relationships, or the same symptom comes back. You know, why does one person just, you know, have chronic migraines that they cannot seem to get out of the loop, and another person has a chronic rash that just keeps erupting on their skin, and another person has a chronic issue with their sleep, and another person has a chronic issue with their right leg and their hip? Or it's like, it's not random. It's not, you know, it's not like these things fell out of the sky and impacted you out of nowhere. it does actually trace back to both the conflict shock, but even deeper than that, the identity that you ascribed to. And that's what somatic inquiry does, is it comes in and we get into the subconscious, where the identity, subconscious and unconscious actually, getting into the levels of the psyche that are less traveled, and we explore which identities are attached to what you've been through, and then we work to dissolve the identity at the root so that you no longer can walk through life getting triggered by the things you used to. And that means you won't be triggered back into your symptoms either.
Thank you for explaining this. I have a couple more questions. So, like, let's say, I think using your example of was it a soccer player? I forgot.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I think you said like just a sports thing, but let's say a soccer player gets yelled at and starts to experience symptoms, maybe like a rash on them.
Yeah.
Does specific symptoms always show up for a specific conflict, or is it different for each person?
That's beautiful. So the symptom relates to the nature or content of the conflict, because it's only through the nature of the conflict that determines where in the brain you will have the Hammer focus, the concentric ring configuration, the tissue change in the actual brain tissue that you can see on a CT scan. That will, the type of conflict and the content and nature and how it was perceived is what determines where in the brain, which embryological germ layer and which part of the brain, temporal lobe, frontal lobe, right, occipital, which part of the brain is going to be hit with that Hammer focus. And then that, whatever part of the body that exact region of the brain has dominion over, is how the tissue changes emerge at the organ level, which is kind of like the organ level would be like the branch, like the furthest thing. And then the psyche was the root, which is why we got to get into the psyche with the inquiry to dissolve it at the root. And that's why Western medicine doesn't always give lasting results when it comes to like surgeries and pharmaceuticals, because that's treating the branch. That's only targeting what's being expressed at like the bottom of this body mind, mind body spirit axis, spirit mind body axis. The Western medical treatments are only targeting what's emerging at kind of the end, and just not really addressing it at the root, but just managing it and trying to like stop it, at the end, versus going, no, we have to go all the way to the beginning and see where the train kind of started to go off the tracks a little bit. Like, let's dissolve this from where it started.
So, because it's the way that the brain,
Yeah, psyche.
psyche perceives it, and everyone has a different perception, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's perception is different.
Yeah.
It would be different in each person, right? So,
yeah, depending on, so that's the thing is, if someone just telling me what they went through, that doesn't give me enough. So for example, let's say you walked in on your boyfriend cheating on you, and you're shocked, and he's in bed with another woman or whatever, and it catches you off guard. If someone tells me that they experienced that, I still don't know enough to begin helping them. I really have to investigate what they made it mean about them and how their psyche really perceived that. Because for one woman, she might walk in on this instance of cheating and she might suddenly feel like, oh my gosh, I'm now going to have to be separated from the person I love, and I still love them and want to be with them, but I can't be with someone who's cheating on me, so I'm going to have to walk away. Anytime we're in a push pull where it's like, I want to separate from you, but I don't, or I want to leave you, but, or I want to be with you, but I feel like I can't be with you. Any kind of push pull relationally like that, we call a separation conflict. So if that particular woman's psyche perceived it as a separation conflict, that actually impacts the skin, the epidermis. And that's where people often can get rashes that actually are triggered by relational experiences. But another woman could walk in on the same scene, her boyfriend cheating on her, and she could say, no longer have, my man is part of my territory, and I no longer have the person in my life that I thought I was going to procreate with. And, that's going to hit the part of her brain that controls the cervix. And she might experience a sexual conflict where she feels like she has a a sexually traumatic experience where she doesn't feel safe with the person she was having sex with. And when women don't feel safe with the person they're having sex with, that usually triggers in the psyche what we call a sexual conflict. And that impacts, parts of the heart and the cervix. But a third woman could walk in and could interpret it as an indigestible morsel. Like, I cannot digest this experience. I literally cannot let myself believe that this has happened. That woman actually might be a little bit more in denial for a while, and she will experience the indigestible morsel of what just happened, what she just witnessed. And that impacts the whole GI tract and can lead to things like diarrhea and vomiting. So you can see that 3 different women could have experienced the same traumatic moment differently based on how their psyche perceived it. But it's, we can categorize how many different ways you can perceive something. And there are kind of like, there is a finite number of conflicts that can be experienced. So it's not like every single person would just have a, brand new biological adaptation. Like, there really are kind of biological systems in place of like, okay, this conflict relates to this part of the body, and we can figure out just by talking through it how you perceived it and find out, okay, it's also very clear based on someone's symptoms what conflict they're running. So
Okay, mind is blown. Mind is
it's a
no,
lot, right? It's a
the
lot.
I think the part that like got me was like I knew where you were going with like, oh, the girl wasn't able to digest like what happened, and she's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 I can't believe it. And I was like, Dr. Grace is gonna say something about like the stomach and stuff like that. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought that that was really spot on, and I understand that because yeah,
Yeah.
like that one just kind of like a light bulb
Oh, okay, good.
clicked.
Yeah. You have to, I think what's so cool about German New Medicine is semantics of how we already speak about things gives us a
Hmm.
lot of context clues for this biological map that has always existed. It's not like Dr. Hammer invented this. Like, this is just what it is. He was able to delineate it, like master it, write it down, do scan thousands of brains and confirm it through CT scans. Like, he was the one that was tasked by the universe to really synthesize this. But this is just how it works. It's not a new thing. It's just, this is the explanation of how our biology works. But the context clues are in language. Like, there's like feeling like someone was torn from your breast. That actually can be the conflict behind someone getting breast cancer or breast lumps. I can't digest that. I can't digest what happened. Well, that's really what it is. The languaging we already have, that's so true. This is like a shitty situation. There's actually something called a shit conflict, and it does affect the rectal, I think it's the rectal submucosa. I could be wrong. Mucosa, submucosa, but it affects the rectal area, and it's called a shit conflict, and it's a particularly ugly situation. And it's like, oh, that's so shitty. Oh, I hate that this happened. There's actually something called a stink conflict that affects the nasal mucosa, and that's what leads to nasal discharge and nasal mucus when you get sick.
Hmm.
It's because you have just resolved something that really stinks, or like you were trying to sniff out danger and you're like, something about the situation just stinks, and like, I'm trying to sniff it out, I'm trying to like figure it out, and that's actually affecting the sense of smell and the nasal mucosa. And as soon as you exit the conflict, you go into the healing phase with the mucus production. So it's, and also the idea of thick skin. Oh, I
Hmm.
have really thick skin, I'm so tough, I don't need anybody, I have thick skin. Well, when you really want to be with someone and you're in a separation conflict around that person, the skin ulcerates, it thins. Your skin's getting thinner because you're trying to get closer to the other person. Our skin is our barrier to other people. So the skin thins in the conflict active phase. The healing phase is where the inflammation rushes in to rebuild those cells that were lost. And that's actually why there's redness, heat, inflammation, and a rash. It's literally the skin's just healing itself because it was ulcerating and cells were dying before to create thinner skin. So the idea of, oh, I have thick skin is like, I'm tough and I don't need anybody. So I have thick skin, I have a bigger barrier between others. Our language already shows us that our psyches have known this, even if we didn't know we knew this. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Wait, can I ask you two more that like I just want to know. What about like migraines and stuff? What does that usually mean?
Migraines, there's so many different headache conflicts, and I'm not as well versed because I'm still pretty new to my exploration of this. But my mentor would always say it was frontal fear or powerlessness. So the idea that something's going to come at you that you cannot escape, that's really feeling attacked, like it's coming on in the front, and powerlessness, feeling like you're absolutely powerless in a situation, can trigger a migraine in the conflict active phase. And what was interesting when I had my own sessions with my mentor, because I suffered from migraines like daily for a very long time after some head injuries, but I knew it was something in my psyche as well. And in my session, he mentioned the frontal fear and the powerlessness, and it was really interesting because since my concussions, my psyche would ruminate every day on this intense fear that something was literally going to fall out of the sky and give me another concussion, and I would be powerless to stop it, and it would come at me, and I'd have to suffer another horrible concussion. So actually that psyche level of rumination, bringing the past into the present and replaying the trauma and constantly feeling the frontal fear with the powerlessness to stop it, it was scary. Sometimes I'd be scared to even walk past people on the beach playing volleyball. I would assume that the volleyball was going to just come at my head, and that's the frontal fear, and the powerlessness is saying I won't be able to prevent another head injury. I'm powerless to prevent it. And those in combination were keeping my migraines alive for so much longer than they needed to be. Yeah, those are the big ones for migraines.
Okay. And then I feel like everyone knows that listens, but like have just, just a little bit of anxiety. Is that, can we do like that one, a somatic
Yeah,
inquiry for anxiety and like what
yeah,
does that mean and stuff like that? I don't know if you need like my specific anxieties or like if we could just do all the
yeah,
anxieties, but like what do you need to
yeah.
know? Like how do we get to the bottom of this?
Well, the other thing that's so beautiful is German New Medicine's just a map, and I have studied so many different things at this point, including like my full-blown training in Chinese medicine. So, as much as I give full reverence and I do believe that German New Medicine is spot on, I also recognize that when we do the somatic inquiry to heal at the identity level, it actually doesn't matter so much whether I knew exactly what conflicts you were running, because once we heal the identities that are active, the false identities, I mean, that have been active, you no longer need to play out, whatever conflict that was, and you'll go through a full resolution and completion with that biological program. And then we'll find out in the symptoms that you get after the healing session. You'll let me know if you go into full resolution, you'll have symptoms in that healing phase. That will actually tell me, what really was behind, what conflict was behind the anxiety. Because anxiety oftentimes is a constellation. That's when there's multiple conflicts in the same parts of the brain on both sides of the brain. And when there's like that double conflict thing going on, that leads to what's called a constellation. And constellations are when we're not just having a biological adaptation, we actually jump to having a behavioral adaptation. So even things like schizophrenia, paranoia, OCD, bipolar, depression, all of these, mental illnesses are not just like every other physical symptom. They're not illnesses, are not like accidents, they're not disease. It's an adaptation from the different conflict shocks that are competing with each other on opposite sides of the brain. And in order to save the organism from that conflict load, the our species has evolved to actually have behavioral adaptations instead of biological adaptations, so that we don't actually die from the biological adaptation.
I'm hearing that I'm like super evolved in
Yeah,
like,
you're
yeah, and that's
you
why
are.
I have anxiety. It's just, I've evolved so much.
You've evolved past the biological symptom. You're just like straight for the behavioral. No,
Hmm.
but I really wish more people knew this, because so many people are told by psychologists or whatever, like, your brain's just different, you just chemically imbalanced, like it just makes you feel so awful about yourself. But you know these things from OCD even up to schizophrenia really can be explained. And actually the work of constellations is a little bit above my training right now where I stand, but the work of constellations is really intricate. But when people that understand it completely, they could tell someone with full-blown schizophrenia, like, especially if they had their brain scan. There's only a few people in the world that read brain scans from a German new medicine lens, and those people are highly coveted right now. You can still reach them if you would want a brain scan, if you can get a brain scan. And so the people that can read brain scans from the GNM perspective, they could tell someone everything that happened in their life that led to them now expressing the psychosis, the schizophrenia, the OCD. And that's, kind of the highest level of GNM, is really unraveling the constellations. But all of us are constellated, pretty much. I mean, I can't say for sure, but pretty much all of us are constellated in some way, because most of us are walking around with a bag of conflicts running in our bodies, not just one or two. A lot of us have multiple and constellations. And so we're all in this together. It's not like some people just have broken brains and other people just have like perfectly healthy brains. That's not how it really works. Like, we're all just at varying degrees of constellation or conflict activity, or in a healing phase, or some of us have a higher conflict load at one point in life versus another. And a lot of times we naturally heal, because, for example, the kind of conflict, let's say that woman that walked in on her boyfriend cheating, whatever conflict she developed, she might not even have to do the psyche work or the somatic inquiry. If she just is able to get into a really healthy, stable relationship with the next man who she really loves and feels safe with, that will clean the slate for her as well in the psyche, because now she feels completely safe. Now her sexual conflict is healed. Now she's having sex with someone who she feels safe with, so, but the only issue is, if we don't do that psyche-based identity work, the somatic inquiry, unfortunately, from the level of people's subconscious beliefs, we all know this, the level of our subconscious beliefs and identities, that's what will continue attracting. So that very woman, if she doesn't do that identity work, she may just find herself in another situation with a cheater who confirms her worthlessness or whatever identity is attached to it. So that's why it's so important to go to the identity level. But in a lot of cases, many people have conflicts that they're actually naturally healing by making different choices in their lives, and they never even needed to do the somatic inquiry, because there are biological solutions to biological problems, but sometimes we need to come in for chronic issues and really unravel it at the psyche level. So I don't even remember your question and how I got there, but
No, I think it was, yes, the question was for anxiety. But I
yeah.
have one question before we go into that. The somatic inquiry, I don't think it's identity shifting. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, that's something completely different, right? Because you're kind of letting go of an identity versus,
Yeah. I
is it?
love that. So something I love to tell people is, how many of us have felt completely authentic with like a best friend? Like, I'm sure you've had that experience. You're sitting with them, you're like laughing your heads off. You're just like, it's so aligned. You're so organic and you feel so authentic. But at no point do either of you stop and look at each other and say, my God, I feel worthy right now. I feel enough right now, I feel important right now. We don't have to stop in those moments and affirm our goodness and affirm our identity as someone who has worthiness and enoughness. Like, I think what I love to tell people is, our worthiness, our enoughness, our inherent goodness, our lovability, all those things are like the basement floor. The root chakra, it's like that is the bottom level of this earth experience, of who we are. That's actually the lowest level of what we are. That's not like we have to climb up and get it. That's just already the status quo as a human being, as a spiritual being in human form. But we have such free will in this experiment, this human experiment, to believe that we're not what is already our inherent God-given identity. And God is so, benevolent that, like, God will let us go our whole lives believing what we want to believe, because that's how free he wants us to be, which is kind of a trip when you think about it. But we really, even though the basement reality of what's true is that we're all divine, perfect, complete, whole, lovable. We are love itself. We could, allow a false identity to hook in our psyche, and we could choose to believe it at a very subconscious level, And this stuff comes from childhood. Like before our brains are really developed, our brains are in a hypnotic state from 0 to 7 years old, and we're being primed by our parents. And a lot of times our parents are passing down their perceptions and their psyche-based identities to us in this like osmotic fashion. So it's at no fault of anybody's own. It's at no fault of the child within all of us. It's none of our fault that we have these false identities that are running the show, but it is a product of the conditioning and the lineage trauma and the generational curses, as they say. I always tell people, if you really want to break generational curses, you need to be the one that dissolves the falseness in you that your parents weren't able to dissolve, that your grandmother was not able to dissolve, that, you know, the stories, the limitation stories and the false identities that they carried, you get to be the one that dissolves that in yourself. And that's how you're actually turning the tide on your whole, you know, family lineage and creating a generational healing moment, right? So the somatic inquiry is about not just saying, okay, now I'm gonna like re-identify myself with new hobbies and I'm gonna like become an athlete and now I'm gonna like reattach my identity to something else. I'm gonna, you know, change my job and change my hair and I'm gonna like really try to be a different person. It's actually completely unraveling and unwinding and disproving to yourself, like an inside job of really unwinding within yourself and within your own subconscious and unconscious, unwinding those false identities so that you get to just rest on that basement floor of the God-given reality that we did inherit before we forgot that that actually is the truth of what we are, because our parents didn't know the truth and our teacher didn't know the truth and our sister didn't know the truth and the coach yelling at that athlete certainly does not know the truth of who he is to be screaming at a kid. So it's like there's all this conditioning that convinces us as little kids and beyond that there's no way I'm lovable. There's no way I'm doing enough and that I am enough. There's no way that I belong. I feel like an outsider. And we can believe that long enough that it becomes an unconscious identity that's running the entire reality we live in.
How long does it take to unravel, or does it depend on the person?
Yeah, so I work with clients online with this, and I like to tell them that some people are so ready that in one session, it's like the light bulb goes off. It's the missing piece to all the healing work they've been doing. It's a dramatic switch that gets turned on in them, and that's all they need. I mean, they might continue doing their own work or continue sessions, but one session can really pivot things. For a lot of people, I'd say a solid 5 to 8 sessions. What happens is in that 5 to 8 session mark, I've noticed people start to kind of like catch on to the difference in what's true and what's not true within themselves. And they start to almost, you know, do their own inquiry. Like I do inquiry on myself now because I've worked with my mentor. You know, I'll still continue to work with him, but I worked with him very intensively for a 4-month period. And now that I've done all those 8 sessions or 10 sessions with him, it's like I can take myself through inquiry when I start to feel the falseness in me like rumble up and kick up dust and want to cause a storm. Like I can sit with it and I can take myself through inquiry around a triggering experience and I can unravel my ego from it, and I can experience that dissolution of the falseness within me and come back to love and truth. And that does take a bit of practice, and that does take a bit of coaching to become someone that can do that on yourself, because it's really hard for us all to see ourselves. But yeah, I'd say 5 to 8 like sessions with someone that's trained in what I'm doing can be very, very profound for people. But everyone's on their own timeline, and the 5th biological law in German New Medicine is quintessence. And I didn't even know what that word meant before I studied GNM, but it's such a profound law and it's such a profound word. Quintessence, the 5th biological law, says there's a divine timing to every moment of your life and every symptom and everything you experience and every trauma and every relationship. And there's a perfect order to when a person is ready to hear the thing that frees them. Like there's something divine about that, like how some people just hear it once and resolve, but another person, like there's a benefit on a cellular level to them actually going on a bit of a wild goose chase, in their healing journey, there's some multiplication of lessons they're picking up along the way, going on that more circular path, and it's not going to be linear for them. And that person can choose to blame the practitioner, or blame God or whatever, that they're not like fixed overnight. But I think what I love about German New Medicine is it's not about getting fixed. It's not about being an adversary of your body and saying like, my body's doing something horribly wrong, fix me, I need someone to fix me, this is a problem. It's actually like, what I love about GNM is when you're in this kind of framework and you're working with a practitioner that does what I do, it's all about, first of all, getting out of the victimhood, that you're actually being victimized by your body. And second of all, kind of relaxing into this experience of letting your body do what, letting your body's innate wisdom play out, trusting that the body's doing something perfect, trusting that you're on a path to reveal more of your own psyche interpretations to yourself. It's a path of self exploration and self mastery that is both delicate and often subtle and sometimes lengthy. And it's not about like, it might not be the path of quintessence for you to just fix, heal everything and feel like you fixed it in one session, you know but for somebody else, maybe they've been on this path a while, or maybe their psyche is absolutely ready to let go of that thing. And so in that one session was that moment of quintessence for them to shift everything. And that person's going to go, you're the best practitioner ever, it's you. And it's like, no, it's not. It's actually, it was a divine orchestration in that fifth biological law of this session, this knowledge, this wisdom, this moment was ready for you, and you were ready for it. It's not about me being like some amazing practitioner. You were ready for it. So I think it's all of this is about putting power back in the person, that you have agency over the stuff going on in your body that you don't like. And if you can start to become an ally of your body and become a companion to this physical vessel we've inherited, that is going to be the way through, not in like fighting everything that's being expressed as an adversary. So
Literally, Dr. Grace, iconic. Like everything is connecting to me, and like when you were talking, I was like, that explains why I feel like I went on such like a long journey with like anxiety and like trying to
yeah,
understand it, and like
yeah,
it kind of makes sense because there were things that like had to kind of unlock at certain times where I was like, oh,
yeah,
I get why I have anxiety and why like I maybe like healed 5% of it a little bit at a time, and then like it kept, oh, okay, now this makes sense. So like that,
yeah.
I what was it, quintessence?
Quintessence.
Yeah, that actually, that's the first time I've heard that word, so way to, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
One last question. So I know a lot of people will sometimes use like their identity to build their routine.
yeah,
How does that go together?
yeah.
Like their, not just their routines, but like their coping mechanisms as well. Like do those all
Ooh.
go together?
Do you have an example?
I do, but hold on, I have to sneeze. I think I have to sneeze. I was gonna try and hold it in, but I don't think it's gonna like.
No, let it go, girl.
Okay, I think it's gone. It's as soon as you acknowledge it, it goes away. So that, at least for me, I'm like, I have to sneeze.
That's a profound lesson. When you fully give your presence to it, that's when it will shift. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's see. I'm thinking routine. Like sometimes, I mean, we can just use like you come home at night. It's after work. It's like a Wednesday
Yeah.
night, and your routine is like come home, pour a glass of wine, and watch television. And at this point, I'm just Olivia Pope and eat popcorn. Like that is the routine or a coping mechanism for the day. So like, how do
Yeah.
those, like that's your identity? Like you just come
Yeah.
home and that's what you do. Do those kind of
Yeah.
go
Well,
together?
I love that because what you're speaking to is actually another angle from which you can kind of enter the somatic inquiry process. By analyzing your coping mechanisms, that will get you in touch with your context. So the term for unconscious identity or false identity that I use is a context. Because basically it's like that identity creates the contextual field within which you live, perceive, act, move, the coping mechanism. So if you can follow the trail of breadcrumbs that each coping mechanism gives you, you'll be led right into the center of that false identity and get the chance to stare at it face to face. Most people feel like they're confused about why they have a coping mechanism. I don't know why I'm addicted to caffeine. I don't know why I'm addicted to vaping. I don't know why I need wine at the end of every work day. I just do. I just do. And there's this kind of like the ego loves to do this kind of thing. I notice this in patients that have like more severe psychosis that I work with. Like the ego loves to do this thing where it's like everything's shrouded in confusion and like almost like foggy mists and clouds. And it's like, who knows? I don't know. I'm none the wiser to what's going on, you know? And it's like, that's a strategy of the ego to get you to never change and never dissolve the ego. So by doing the inquiry process and by being guided by a trained practitioner, you'll really piece together exactly what you think you're avoiding or getting from that coping mechanism or strategy. So for example, it's like, okay, I feel bored at the end of the day. They might, I feel anxious when I get home and it's quiet and I'm alone. And then I just drink wine and it seems to make it better. But we have to go a layer deeper. Nobody does anything without some utility or function to that thing. So for example, like some people will say like, I don't really think I have a reason to vape, I just do. It's like, no, there's a very good, just like symptoms are not random, like your coping mechanisms also are not random. Like there's a very specific reason why you choose to vape or have that glass of wine. And it's because there's something really specific, which is attached to an unconscious identity that you're trying to avoid. And it's pretty much 9.5 times out of 10 avoiding a feeling is what we're all doing. And it's really sad because you could look out on the street at homeless people on drugs or some guy on a bench smoking a cigarette or someone drunk drunk out of their mind on the streets on a Saturday night. And what's really interesting is like how interesting that something so harmless like a feeling has created so much chaos in the world, like need to avoid a feeling has propelled the masses into their own psychosis of addiction, right? That we all have. We're all coping for something. Like there's so few humans. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't still have a trickster ego and context and falseness. Like we all have this. This is like these are the lessons we're here to learn as we slowly conquer them through our lives and go on the wild goose chase that we are talking about, like with your anxiety. Like it's all like, I like to call it Earth School. We're in Earth School and we have these like a huge curriculum. We all have a unique curriculum and there's all these soul lessons we have to learn. And part of that is getting acquainted with the identity attached to the coping strategy and what we think we're avoiding by doing it or what we think we're getting when we do it. Oh, I get peace. And then you really have to question. That's part of the inquiry process. Does it really give you peace? Like the peace you think you're getting from this thing, let's play out this coping strategy and how long you've done it and tell me on the other side of doing this every night, drinking wine, do you feel that you attain that lasting peace? Well, no, actually, I think it's making my anxiety worse because then it messes with my sleep and then I wake up and I'm tired. And it's like, oh, okay, so you actually, this is where we have to get really familiar with our own psyche stories and recognize that everything we think we're getting out of coping isn't what we're getting. We're not actually getting it. You know what I mean? Like it's just this ego trickster story that's like, that'll help, try that, grab the wine, grab the coffee, grab this. And it's actually just a story. And if we were to sit and really marinate in the feeling that we had been avoiding and get in touch with the part of us that's screaming and craving for that thing, we'd realize that when you play that out, my mentor loves to say like, play that pattern out for the next 50 years. How peaceful is your life? Mm-hmm. Play that out for the next 50 years, like how centered will you feel on the other side of utilizing this coping strategy? And it's like, that would be the opposite of peace. But I'm reaching for it because I have convinced myself that peace is in that. So it's this, we really just have to we have to cozy up with our identities and our psyches. And a big part of this work is making sure that there's no element of shame or blame, criticism, or wrongness because none of these identities are your fault that you picked them up. Like these are like ancient codes of mind manipulation that have come onto the planet, that have kind of intercepted the field of love that we're supposed to be living in. So we're all inheriting these mind viruses from people and from others as children, and with our parents, and our parents are passing down perceptions from their parents. And my mentor loves to say that our parents don't pass down disease, they pass down perceptions, and those perceptions prime you for certain diseases, which is why disease runs in a family, really. So I hope that answers your question, but
It
I could
does.
say more. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you've answered all of my questions. I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, thank you so much. One more question before we wrap this up. Where can people like work with you if they want to do somatic inquiry and like get to the bottom of anything that they're feeling in their body or any
Yeah.
symptoms or stuff like that?
So I work with people. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and I have a private practice here in San Diego. So people can work with me in person. And anytime you're in my care, you're going to get all of it. So for people that live in California, I actually kind of work all over the state, but it's awesome if they can connect with me for the acupuncture experience, because getting to do this work in person and combine somatic inquiry and the German New Medicine map with my spiritual acupuncture that I practice, people that have access to all that I do, like they just seem to get better the fastest, because they're getting the most out of me. But I do work very effectively with people all over online. So as long as you speak English and you're willing to use Zoom, like you can find me on Instagram or my website and reach out to me, and we can set up sessions where we do this work together and we decode your symptoms and we uncover what's really at the heart of it, and we unravel those unconscious identities. And I think something I'd love to just state, if it's okay, if I can take a couple minutes, is because it plays into because I know we wanted to do a session for you, which we'd probably get to maybe in another podcast or whatever. But something that I would just want to point out is what we think we're afraid of is never what we're really afraid of. So what we're really afraid of is finding out that these false identities are true. That's the biggest fear ever. So when someone says like, I'm afraid of, you know, losing my parent, let's say, because we've kind of started the conversation about our healthy parents. Let's say it's like, I'm so like terrified of losing my parent. Well, there's nothing terrifying about reality without a story, right? Like reality without a story is like, a person passes on and continues in another realm and their soul goes on, like that even has a bit of story. But I guess reality without a story is that someone's heart stops. I guess that would be reality without a story. So we have to go a little deeper, like, okay, well, are you really afraid of that, or are you afraid of what it would mean for you? Because everything we're experiencing, it has to be personal, right? I can't be afraid for someone else. Like it's a fear in me. So it's like, well, if I lose my parent, that person's kind of my lifeline. Without them, I don't even know where I'd get love. Like that's the only person who loves me unconditionally. Okay, so you actually would face that you're unlovable without them. That's what you're afraid of, is the identity, I'm unlovable now, and they actually were the reason I was lovable. And then you're putting all your lovability, you're collapsing it into one human, when your lovability is this eternal inheritance, right? Or it's like, if they pass, I'll be completely alone. And then I have to face off with, I'm just alone in the world. Okay, that's really heavy. That could bring up a lot of emotion. Well, what's interesting, that person who's afraid of their parent passing because they're going to be unlovable or alone, the irony is they're already living in the identity, I'm unlovable or I'm alone. All we can ever do is project our current perceptual framework, our current identities onto the future. So if I feel unsafe now, everything I'm about to do or choose to do, or traveling or going here, I'm like, oh, it's going to be scary there, it's going to be unsafe. No, you can't live in a different moment than this moment. Right now you're already feeling and carrying the identity, I'm unsafe. And so you have to project what's here now onto that future timeline. You already feel alone, and then you can project that, you'll feel really alone when your parent passes. But actually, the catch 22 is that fear you have is already what is controlling you right now. It's not even about that thing you think you're scared of happening later. Like this is the fear that controls you now. So just wanted to point that out because for whoever's listening, they could start to just unravel things for themselves with that knowledge. Like, what am I really afraid of? What is that identity that I'm so afraid to bump up against that I fear is true should this circumstance happen? And then how can I see that that's actually already my belief system? That's already my identity. And I'm just projecting that onto everything. And that's a lot of times where people's anxiety is, right? Because it's the anxiety of how can I live in a world that's completely unsafe? But it's really, we just need to address why are you believing in your unsafety right here, right now? So that's just another high level tidbit that I hope hits home for someone. Yeah, I would love, if people would just connect with me on Instagram. I'm very active there. So my Instagram is Dr. Grace Reego, Dr. Grace, and then my last name is Reego. And then I have a website, inspiritalchemy.com, that's going through reconstruction right now, but you can find me on my website. And yeah, we can probably link like my email below or whatever.
I'll put your Instagram and your website and your email in the description box below. So if you want to reach
Perfect.
out to Dr. Grace and work with her, you can, and you know exactly where to go. Thank you so much, Dr. Grace. I do feel like we need a part 2 of
Yeah.
us chatting because we have so many things to talk about. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
explaining all of these things so just easy to understand. Like I was
Okay,
like
good.
listening and like I was just like, yep, got it, clocked. So
I'm
I
glad because I
appreciate
can
it.
I can talk in circles sometimes, so I appreciate
No,
that.
it's perfect. So I just want to thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who's listening to this episode. I hope
Yeah.
that you found it helpful. Look out for Dr. Grace's next episode with Concept Wellbeing because I'm sure it'll be coming up soon.
Yeah.
With that being said, I hope that y'all have a good day or a good night, and I hope that y'all are well. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.